This podcast is brought to you by Revival, Book 1 of the Unveiled book series.
Welcome back to the AI Analysis Podcast. Are you looking for a new book series to sink your teeth into? Well, we're looking at an episode of the Arete Podcast with author Debbie Lynn, where she talks about her urban fantasy series, The Unveiled, and specifically the first book, Revival.
Yeah, that's right.
We've taken the conversation from that interview and pulled out some really fascinating insights about the book, the author's process, and the urban fantasy genre itself.
Right. Our goal here is really to explore what makes this book, Revival, feel unique in that whole urban fantasy landscape, and also understand the journey the author took to bring this magical world to life. We'll try to distill the core elements, maybe some surprising details from the interview that you really need to know.
Okay, so let's start maybe with the author's origin story, how her background shaped her craft. Debbie Lynn's connection to writing, it goes way back, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's not recent. She mentioned starting to write at, get this, 3 years old.
3. Wow.
Yeah. Can you imagine? Reading by 2, apparently, and knew right then she wanted to be a writer. She even still has some stories from when she was a kid.
That's incredible. That kind of deep-seated passion, it's pretty rare, isn't it?
It really is. It wasn't like a midlife career change or a sudden idea. It feels like it's just fundamental to who she is since she was basically a toddler.
Yeah, it makes you really appreciate the persistence involved.
Definitely. It's not just about writing a book. It feels like living out a core part of herself.
Totally. And yet, alongside this, her career path took this, what seems like a totally different turn into therapy.
Right. The backup plan, as she called it.
Yeah. Until writing could take over full time.
It's such a fascinating mix, isn't it?
Yeah.
Clinical therapist working with the human mind and an urban fantasy author creating magical worlds. How does that therapy background feed into her writing, especially with characters? Well, she really highlighted that connection as crucial. I mean, her years as a therapist give her this profound insight into human motivation, right? Internal conflicts, the complex inner monologue that drives us. She even mentioned that she herself has this constant inner dialogue, and that kind of naturally transfers to her characters. So you're not just seeing what they do.
You're getting the why.
Exactly. You get glimpses into why they do it, their internal struggles, their fears, justifications. It adds this layer of psychological realism, even when there's magic all around.
That's such a critical point.
Huh.
The interviewer in the original chat specifically complimented her on that, her grasp of character motivation, and noted it's not always there in fiction or not done well.
Right. It sounds like her professional expertise isn't just some side note. It's like foundational. It lets her craft characters whose reactions, whose decisions feel authentic, even when they're facing totally fantastical stuff after the unveiling.
Yeah, it really grounds it. Think about what her characters go through, waking from a coma into this magically changed world, dealing with betrayal, keeping huge secrets.
A therapist's understanding of trauma, coping mechanisms, relationships, internal conflict, it just provides this unique lens, doesn't it?
Yeah.
To explore all that in a believable way. It grounds the extraordinary in relatable human psychology.
Okay, so moving from character depth to the actual words on the page, her writing style, she balances contemporary dialogue with what was described as timeless, vivid prose.
Yes, that balance seems really intentional. The dialogue feels authentic, modern, which you need for urban fantasy set now.
Right.
But she pairs that with prose that creates atmosphere, paints a picture, but
Right.
without getting, bogged down in tons of detail.
Be some classic fantasy authors night.
Exactly. She mentioned authors she admires, like Tolkien or Stephen King, for their incredible minds, their worlds. But she said their really long descriptive passages just aren't her cup of tea as a reader. She specifically found the Silmarillion really tough going, even back in high school, called it mentally taxing.
So she's aiming for description that evokes something, keeps the story moving, lets your imagination fill in some gaps.
Precisely. It's about efficiency, maybe, giving you just enough detail to feel grounded, feel the atmosphere, but really prioritizing the character's experience and the plot moving forward. It's a style choice that probably makes the book feel more accessible,
Yeah.
especially if dense fantasy isn't your thing.
Now, Revival is her first marketed, published book. But it wasn't her very first time dipping her toe into publishing, right? She mentioned an earlier book.
Yes, a nonfiction one, based on her therapy work. She had actually published it before, but then pulled it.
Why pull it?
Well, this is telling. She wanted to redesign the cover and get another, more thorough editing pass. So that experience seems like it was pretty foundational for how she approached self-publishing Revival.
And that self-publishing journey,
Hmm.
it didn't sound easy.
No, she was very frank about it, called it a lot of work, said there were moments of crying and cursing, described it as a pretty steep learning curve.
Which makes sense. It's not just writing.
Right. You become your own publisher, marketer, business manager, everything.
She took an interesting path. First, publishing Revival on Kindle Vella initially, starting Halloween 2022. What was the idea there?
That seemed like a strategic move. Two main goals, really. Getting reader feedback early on and generating some funding.
Oh, funding. Right.
Yeah, Vella lets you publish serially, chapter by chapter. Readers pay per chapter. So it gave her an early audience to see how the story landed. And crucially, the money helped pay for the really essential stuff needed to polish the book for a wider release.
Like editing and cover design.
Exactly. Professional editing, professional cover design. The full paperback and ebook versions then came out a year later, Halloween 2023.
So Vella wasn't just publishing. It was almost like a development tool, a way to refine it and finance the final product. And she really, really stressed investing in those professional services, didn't she?
Absolutely. This is probably key for anyone thinking about self-publishing. She emphasized, like really strongly, do not skimp on hiring a professional editor.
Even with her background.
Even with her own writing background, her master's degrees, she felt she needed those external expert eyes. She even wished she'd paid more for editing on that earlier book.
Wow.
And she stressed the absolute necessity of a professional graphic designer for the cover. She calls the cover the first impression.
Which it is.
Yeah, and a bad cover, she argued, just screams unprofessionalism. It turns readers off before they even read the first page, no matter how good the writing is. It's that initial handshake, you know?
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Especially online, the cover's the first thing you see. It has to look professional, fit the genre, or, intentionally break the mold in a cool way.
And it sounds like she leaned heavily on resources and community support to figure all this out.
Yeah, navigating that learning curve.
She mentioned Google being like her best friend for finding templates, checklists, timelines, all that stuff. But just as important was connecting with other writers.
With studios?
Yeah, Facebook groups. She mentioned moms who write as a really supportive one she's in, and forming writing groups for critique, for support. That whole idea of sharing information, sharing lessons learned, sometimes from expensive mistakes, seemed vital.
It really shows that even solitary things like writing benefit so much from community, from shared knowledge. Okay, so once the book is polished and published, where can people typically find it?
She uses the main channels. Amazon, of course, it's the biggest player, but she also uses Ingram Spark.
And that's important for...
That's crucial for getting the book available to physical bookstores, other online retailers like bookshop.org, and libraries. She did note that most self-published authors are primarily online unless they hit it really big, but using both Amazon and Ingram Spark definitely maximizes the potential reach.
Right, covers more bases. Okay, let's shift from the journey to the book to actually stepping inside Revival. Authors often struggle with that short elevator pitch, right? Summing up their novel quickly. Debbie Lynn admitted she finds that hard.
Oh, it's a classic struggle. How do you boil down hundreds of pages, complex characters into like 2 sentences?
Yeah.
But she did give a good spoiler-free summary in the interview.
Okay, what's the gist?
Basically, Revival is a modern-day urban fantasy. The main character, Tori, wakes up from a coma, but while she was out, the world changed dramatically.
How so?
This event called the Unveiling happened, and suddenly magic is everywhere. It's just appeared, altering reality. And on top of that, she finds out her long-term boyfriend is now with her sister.
Oof, rough awakening.
Yeah, seriously, things spiral pretty fast. Tori gets pulled into dangerous stuff she doesn't understand. She has to live this double life, keep secrets from everyone, all while trying to stop some major disaster.
Okay, that coma hook. That immediately jumped out at me hearing the synopsis. It feels like such a smart narrative device for this kind of story.
It really is fascinating and so effective because it puts you, the reader, in the exact same confused, bewildered state as Tori.
Right.
She wakes up, the world makes no sense, magic is real, the rules are different, her personal life is chaos. And as the reader, you discover this new magical reality right along with her. You feel the weirdness, the shock, the confusion, and then that gradual process of understanding and adapting.
That shared journey makes the fantasy stuff feel so much more relatable. It's not just an info dump about magic. You experience it through Tori's eyes as she's figuring it out.
Yeah.
The interviewer called it fantastic, a great way to get us in the non-magical world, introduced to it right along with our protagonist.
It really is. It's such a natural, organic way into the extraordinary, especially for a story set in our world. And as Tori gets more comfortable with magic through the book, the reader does too. Things that seem totally bizarre at the start begin to feel, well, normal within the story's context by the time you're maybe 3/4 through. It's just a really clever use of point of view for the world building.
So how does revival fit into the wider urban fantasy genre? Debbie Lynn talked about the sort of academic definition.
Yeah, the standard definition, as she described it, is basically fantasy set in a modern, usually urban world where magic and the regular world coexist, either secretly or, like in this case, newly revealed. The contrast is usually with, like, rural fantasy. So the setting, that blend of mundane and magical, those are key.
And she mentioned some series that sometimes cause debate about whether they...
Right, like Harry Potter. You know, there are urban bits, like Diagon Alley in London. Most of it's in Hogwarts, that secluded magical place. So some purists say maybe it's not strictly UF. She also didn't classify Twilight as urban fantasy, which just shows how blurry genre lines can be.
She drew inspiration from some big names in the genre, but also consciously decided to move away from certain tropes.
Yeah, she was a fan of series like Ilona Andrews's Kate Daniels, Patricia Briggs's Mercy Thompson. Those really took off around the mid-2000s. They often have werewolves, vampires, darker tones, and yeah, those iconic covers with the badass women in leather holding weapons.
And she felt tired of that specific image.
Pretty much. She said she grew a bit tired of that particular mold. She wanted to create a world that wasn't quite so dark and feature a different kind of protagonist. Not the typical leather-clad, tough-as-nails type.
So how is Tori, the main character in Revival, different then?
Debbie Lynn deliberately made Tori almost the opposite of that archetype. She wanted her to be girly, you know? Someone who might wear skirts and Converse sneakers, someone who isn't afraid to be vulnerable or cry, but still has that essential strength, that backbone to survive this new world.
And the cover reflects that difference, too.
Yeah, the cover art was designed to show that, moving away from that standard badass woman with sword look you see so often.
It sounds like she was blending genres, too, not just pure urban fantasy.
Definitely. She described Revival as a magical realism, contemporary urban-esque fantasy.
That's a mouthful.
It is. But it highlights the blend, right? Magical realism elements, magic subtly entering our world, contemporary setting, urban environment, clear fantasy elements. It suggests it might appeal to readers who like contemporary fiction or magical realism, but are maybe ready for something with more overt fantasy.
And other media influenced her, too. TV shows.
Oh, yeah. Big Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan. She even said she wished Revival was more Buffy-like in some ways. And she mentioned the sequel, Remed, is going to have more of a darker vibe, maybe a bit like the show Grimm, so the series might evolve in tone.
Choosing to step away from the typical genre look, the cover, the description, that can be a marketing challenge, though, right?
You acknowledge that, yeah. If it doesn't immediately scream urban fantasy in the usual way, core fans looking for that might skip over it.
But the flip side...
The flip side is that the difference might attract readers looking for something a bit outside that box. Something accessible, maybe more grounded despite the magic. The interviewer agreed, called it accessible, and even joked the typical UF cover looks like Xena Warrior Princess, which really highlights how different Tori's image is.
Urban fantasy often uses the city setting, almost like another character. How does Revival handle its setting, Indianapolis?
That's a classic trope, for sure. She mentioned Kate Daniels' post-apocalyptic Atlanta is doing that really well. In Revival, her approach for Indianapolis is a bit different. Instead of like huge descriptions making the city itself a main character, she weaves in specific local details that mean something to her personally.
Like what?
She mentioned putting in Mojo's coffee shop, a real place she used to go to, attend poetry readings, even read it herself. She put it in partly because she was sad it closed down.
That feels more personal, more authentic somehow.
Exactly. It's about sprinkling in those recognizable specific things rather than a full city tour. The interviewer liked that balance, not so much detail it annoys people who don't know Indy, but enough for locals to go, oh, I know that place. She mentioned specific spots like Mass Ave and how people mean a certain lively area when they say that.
What about places that aren't real, like Bram's Mansion?
She confirmed that's fictional, not based on a real place like the Dolphin Mansion some people might know. She designed it to fit Bram's character, ritzy neighborhood, big, sprawling entrance, giving that sense of old money power. Interestingly, she didn't pinpoint exact locations for where characters like Marina or Bennett or Bram live, kind of leaves it open to the reader's imagination, though she did say Bram's area feels like maybe Carmel, but closer in.
Okay, let's dig into the characters and relationships. Killian sounds intriguing. Enigmatic.
Yeah, the interviewer called him perpetually an enigma, and Debbie Lynn basically agreed. He's the one who shows up right after Tori wakes up. He essentially recruits her, or maybe blackmails her for his boss, using her sister as leverage.
Why does his boss need Tori?
Because her magic got enhanced by the coma. She's more powerful or different somehow.
So he starts out clearly antagonistic, or at least very shady, but the author changed his path.
She did. Apparently, she first saw him as more of a straightforward enforcer type, the bad guy. But as she wrote him, he kind of evolved, and she realized she wanted him to be redeemable. Maybe even a potential love interest down the road.
That requires some serious rewriting, I bet.
Oh, yeah. She had to significantly change his character, especially those early interactions with Tori, to even make that redemption seem possible later on.
And his real motivation is still kind of a mystery?
It seems like a big one. His specific underlying reasons are something she plans to really dig into in book 2. The interviewer thought his motivation, what we see in book 1, was well done and not just a typical villain thing, so that sounds promising.
What about Tori herself? What sparked her creation?
Tori's interesting because she's the first protagonist Debbie Lynn created who wasn't a self-insert. She's entirely fictional.
Giving her more freedom.
Exactly. And like we talked about, the inspiration was wanting that opposite of the standard UF heroine. She also wove in her own interests, like her love for classical languages and cultures, which ties into the magic system. But the main driver was creating that girly but strong character. Yeah. Vulnerable but able to stand up for herself.
She also mentioned wanting a love triangle, which people definitely have feelings about.
Yeah, she admitted she eats it up, even knowing it's divisive. But she did say the dynamic in Revival isn't static. It transforms throughout the book. So maybe it doesn't play out exactly like people expect. Could be a fresh take on it.
And the ending of Revival sounds like it was designed to leave people hanging.
Oh, absolutely. Intentionally. She said it was controversial even for her editor. It leaves a lot of questions unanswered, leaves characters in really uncertain, tricky spots.
That could definitely frustrate some readers, wanting more closure in book 1.
It could, but she framed it as deliberate. She sees book 1, Revival, as basically the origin story for the whole universe and the characters. The ending isn't meant as a conclusion, it's the catalyst. It sets up the bigger series climax and is designed to make you need the sequels to get answers. It's a classic series strategy, right?
Yeah, build that anticipation. The interviewer mentioned a specific knife twist moment with Tori and her sister that really worked for them.
Yes. That twist, the author said, was planned from the very start and has big consequences for later books. She apparently rewrote Tori's reaction in that scene multiple times to get it just right, capturing the emotion, the defiance. The interviewer described Tori's final reaction as basically telling them where they can put it, so it sounds like a really powerful, assertive moment for her.
And the entity behind the big change at the very end. Characterized in a weird way.
Yeah, the source described it as acting almost like a force of nature, just observing things unfold with this kind of detached, mild amusement, like it doesn't really care about the consequences for the people involved.
Not a typical villain, then.
No, it seems more like some powerful, maybe indifferent cosmic force. Adds another layer of mystery and scale to the magic, doesn't it? Instead of just a bad guy with a plan.
That is fascinating. Okay, let's switch gears to something really unique here, the way linguistics and languages are baked into the magic system.
Yeah, this is where Debbie Lynn's academic side really shines. She has a degree in linguistics, almost did a doctorate in psycholinguistics, how language works in the brain. She just said her passion for words and languages is interesting to me, which feels like a massive understatement given how central it is.
So how does that passion show up in the magic in the Unveiled?
Well, the magic is heavily tied to language. Spells often use classical languages, specifically Latin and Greek. And there's one spell that uses Sanskrit, too.
That just feels right somehow. The idea that words have power, that certain languages carry energy, it taps into old ideas.
It really does. And the Sanskrit part came from her background as a yoga teacher, where Sanskrit terms are common. She said she didn't necessarily know the exact Sanskrit words in that spell, but knew it was a classical language like Latin and Greek, so she included it. Another layer of ancient linguistic power.
She made a specific choice about the Latin, though, right?
Yep.
Not conjugating verbs perfectly.
Yes, that was deliberate. She decided not to aim for perfect grammatical conjugation. Why? To avoid potential errors that might pull a reader out of the story, especially if they happen to know Latin really well.
So the focus is on the feel, the power of using those languages for magic, not strict academic accuracy.
Exactly. It's a practical storytelling choice.
The interviewer brought up an interesting idea about language structure reflecting culture.
Yeah, they talked about how the way a language is built, sentence structure, how plurals work, things like that can reflect the culture using it. They gave examples like Spanish versus Japanese. And they applied that idea to the Latin and Greek in the book, suggesting maybe the choice of those languages for magic hints at deeper cultural or historical things in the world building that might come up later. Adds potential depth for readers who like thinking about how magic systems work.
Sounds like there was some fun linguistic nerding out in the conversation, too.
Oh, yeah. They touched on things like vulgar Latin, the everyday spoken language of the Roman Empire, different from classical Latin, and the origin of the word vandalize, tracing it back to the Germanic tribe, the Vandals, who sacked Rome from Carthage. Apparently, they absolutely wrecked it, hence our word.
Oh, didn't know that.
Me neither.
Yeah.
And Debbie Lynn talked about loving classics like Beowulf and Chaucer from high school, even memorizing the prologue to the Canterbury Tales in Middle English. Just shows that lifelong love of language.
Another really specific detail was the distinction she makes between mage and magician.
Yes. This initially confused the interviewer a bit because it flips common pop culture usage. In this world, mages are the ones who study magic. Magicians are the ones who use magic.
Which is often the other way around in fantasy, right? Where mages are seen as more powerful or scholarly.
Often, yeah. Magicians can sometimes bring up images of stage magic, top hats and bunnies. Debbie Lynn wanted mages to feel more like the students of magic in games like Dragon Age, focused on learning theory and history. And she wanted to elevate magician from the stage performer image. Though she did admit, shows like The Magicians have made that turn cool again recently.
So the interviewer was confused at first, but then appreciated the specific choice.
Exactly. Once she explained the reasoning, it went from maybe confusing to something the interviewer called one of their favorite small details. It just shows her meticulous world building down to the very words used.
And there was a little hint dropped about exploring more of this magical universe later.
Yes, the character Bennett apparently uses the plural other realms at one point. That wasn't accidental. It's a clear signal that the world of the Unveiled is bigger than just our reality plus the one magic realm revealed. It sets up potential exploration of different dimensions or planes in the sequels, definitely expands the scope.
That opens up a lot of possibilities for future books.
For sure. It shows that while Revival might be the origin story for this world and these characters, the author's got a much bigger universe in mind.
We'll get back to the magic after this quick break.
The veil between her world and the other realm has faded, unleashing magic into the lives of ordinary citizens. Awakening from a 4-year coma, Tori James discovers a world transformed. For some, like Tori, the unveiling ignites hidden abilities. With her expertise in classical languages, she's drawn into a world of thieves and magic. Join Tori on her magical journey in Book 1 of the Unveiled book series, Revival. Unveil your destiny.
Welcome back. Let's talk about the future of the Unveiled series. Debbie Lynn has a plan, right? A roadmap.
She does. Currently, the plan is for 4 books, though she mentioned she'd play with 3 or 5 as the overall arc developed, and that main series arc has evolved a bit since she started, which is pretty normal as stories grow.
And the timing between books is pretty tight.
Yeah, they're set relatively close together, roughly 3 months apart following the seasons. Book 1, Revival, starts around Halloween. Book 2 is titled Remid, and it starts on New Year's Day. And Book 3.
Book 3, no title yet, is set in the springtime.
Springtime in Indianapolis, that could mean.
Exactly. She mentioned potentially including action around the Indy 500 mini marathon, that big race in May.
Oh, the traffic nightmare.
Laughs. Yeah, the interviewer apparently hates the mini marathon traffic and hoped for a scene where characters get stuck because they forgot about the race.
That would be hilarious.
Debbie Lynn said it was possible. Maybe characters like Casey or Bennett get caught up in the chaos. It's a fun way to ground the fantasy in those specific, relatable local moments.
What's the status of Book 2 Remid right now?
She's actively writing it. She mentioned she actually had it about half done at one point, but then last summer she made the huge decision to rewrite the whole thing from scratch.
Wow, why?
Felt the first version wasn't meaty enough, wanted more complexity, more depth, but that rewrite led to getting stuck for about 5 months, which, again, totally relatable for creators.
So how did she get unstuck? She stepped away, worked on something else briefly, came back to remid, and apparently just one sentence on page 3 suddenly unlocked the whole thing. Isn't that just the way it works sometimes? That tiny detail opens the floodgates. It's almost mystical, that part of the creative process.
Absolutely. Highlights how unpredictable writing is. The solution to a huge block can come from the smallest thing.
It really does.
Yeah.
And it shows her dedication, being willing to scrap half a book to make it stronger.
Does she have a target release for remid?
She's aiming for January, but, as that rewrite shows, writing and publishing can be unpredictable. So that's the goal, but things can happen.
And she's starting to connect with readers more directly. Events.
Yes, setting up local book signings, planning to attend book festivals this summer in Louisville and Columbus, connecting with other authors, readers. And she hinted at something big, potentially, first week of November. Couldn't give details, legal clearance stuff, but said it would be very appropriate for her to be there. Makes you wonder what kind of event fits her book so well.
Definitely intriguing. Something your fans to watch out for. Okay, circling back one last time to that ending of Revival. She reiterated how, even if it leaves you hanging, it serves a purpose for the series.
Yeah, she sees that ending as vital for setting it up as that origin story. It leaves key mysteries open, like the full story behind Tori's coma, how it connects to the unveiling. It leaves characters in uncertain places. It's not just loose ends. It's the launch pad for the bigger story arc across the 4 books. The moment the universe is really defined and the main conflicts kick off.
So putting it all together, the author's background, her take on the genre, the book's unique elements, the series plan, why should you, the listener, maybe pick up Revival?
Well, we've heard it offers a fresh angle on urban fantasy, right? Especially with the protagonist who feels relatable, not just a standard trope. That coma beginning really pulls you into the world alongside her. The characters seem layered, maybe thanks to her therapy background. And that clever personal use of linguistics and the magic, that's really unique. Plus, the series promises more mystery, character growth, and maybe even exploring other realms.
And hearing about her creative process, especially the self-publishing side, that has lessons for anyone with a creative passion, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Her advice to remember, prioritize is a verb. That really hits home. She talked about balancing being a solo parent, therapist, yoga teacher. Writing is this labor of love that just won't happen unless you actively make time for it.
Even just 15 minutes.
Right. She stressed if you don't prioritize that creative thing, it just falls away and then you regret it. That's a powerful message for anyone struggling to carve out time for what matters to them.
And that whole conversation about process connects back to the simple joy of stories that came up too.
Yeah, that brief bit about favorite books, classics, it highlighted that fundamental connection between author, interviewer, and presumably readers too. Just that shared love for reading, storytelling, how stories connect us, challenge us. It's a reminder that behind all the business and craft, there's this core passion. She even mentioned how small bits of feedback can stick with an author, like a random line becoming a reader's favorite part.
So if this conversation about Revival and the Unveiled has caught your interest, we definitely encourage you to check it out.
Yeah, you can find Revival online, Amazon, Ingram Spark, which gets it into indie bookstores and libraries too. And if you want to follow Debbie Lynn for updates on Book 2, Remid, and her events, she's online, as Debbie Lynn writes, website, social media, all that.
Stepping into the Unveiled really means embracing a world where the ordinary and extraordinary are suddenly permanently mixed.
And we talked about how that ending of Revival is this origin point, leaving things uncertain, transformed, that kind of sudden shift where the rules you knew just break. It raises an interesting question, I think, for any of us, really. When reality fundamentally changes, whether it's magic appearing or something more mundane in our own lives, how much do we actually need to understand the past of that change or predict its future to just navigate the present moment? What tools, what instincts become most important when the map you were using is suddenly useless?
That's definitely something to think about as you consider stepping into a world where magic just showed up.
Well, that wraps up our look at the Arete Podcast episode featuring author Debbie Lynn and her book, Revival.
We hope this conversation has given you a detailed picture of the book, the author's really interesting background, and maybe sparked your interest in exploring this series yourself.
Thank you for joining us for this exploration of the source material.
Until next time.
okay, the gatekeepers are real, and they're like, no, you are not metal because you have pop elements in your music. Okay. But that's my favorite thing about Velena, is that we write and put what we want in music because we have an appreciation for almost all music. Almost.
No country songs coming from Velena anytime soon?
No. Although it is kind of top secret, I do have a pop country song that I run for sync licensing.
Oh, that reminds me. I have a song that I'm going to send you because of the generation that you're a member of. Yeah, you'll appreciate it. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but you'll laugh. Well, I have to ask a question, otherwise you won't get the joke. When you were younger, did you play the Oregon Trail?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Okay, you'll love the song. Okay, I'll send it to you. Fans of the podcast know exactly what's coming her way. I found the song by complete accident, but you will love it.
Oh, okay.
So
everyone died, right? or a snake bite.
The song is titled "You Have Died of Dysentery."
See, even I remember that. Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
It's Rachel. It's too funny.
I love it.